Hello, and welcome to Boss Raid. Before he was the greatest wizard in all of fiction, Disney's Donald Duck featured in several video games, many to high reception. Among these games was a little gem titled Donald Duck Goin Quackers, or Quack Attack as it was known outside the US. It was released in late 2000 for the PlayStation 1, Nintendo 64, Dreamcast, PC, PlayStation 2, and GameCube. There was also a Game Boy Color and Game Boy Advance port. The version that I remember fondly from my childhood was the N64 version. It was the kind of game the whole family could enjoy. Though I never really heard much talk about it over the years, the N64 version was the only version I knew of. So I was quite surprised when years later I decided to look the game up and found there were many other versions, and they were all quite different than what I remembered. The home console versions can be split into three categories: the PS1 by itself, the Nintendo 64, Dreamcast, and PC, and finally the PS2 and GameCube. I think most interesting is the difference between the PS1 version and the N64 Dreamcast PC versions. They're both similar yet very different at the same time. In this video, I'll mainly be focusing on showing the differences between these two versions, but we'll also take a quick look at the other versions later. First, a quick overview of the similarities of all the games. You play as Donald Duck on a quest to rescue his romantic interest Daisy from the evil wizard Merlock. With the help of Professor Gyro's technology, Donald must travel through the 4 worlds, completing each world's 4 levels and defeating the boss of each world. There is also a bonus level to unlock in each world, as well as time trials for the main 4 levels. Donald doesn't have a typical health bar, rather if he takes any damage, he goes into an angry mode. When angry, or quackers if you will, his animations become more aggressive, but more importantly, if you take another hit in this state, you die. Let's jump in and start comparing. On the left side of the screen is the Nintendo 64 version, and on the right is the PlayStation 1 version. Note that while I refer to it as the N64 version, it's practically identical to the Dreamcast and PC versions. I just chose the N64 arbitrarily, and also it's the version I remember as a kid. Right away, we see the first huge difference, the opening cutscene. The PS1 version features a fancy pre-rendered CGI cutscene, or FMV as we called it back then. The N64 uses real-time in-game models, though it doesn't look nearly as good. The same scenario is presented well. Donald, Gladstone, and Gyro look on as Daisy is reporting on Merlock's evil doings. As Merlock kidnaps Daisy, Donald and Gladstone run off to her rescue. These scenes are all voiced by the same cast, and from what I can tell, none of them are what you would call the original voice actors. However, Donald is voiced by Tony Anselmo, who has been his voice actor since at least 1985, and is probably the voice most people would be familiar with these days. Another thing to note here is that, at least according to the Disney fandom page, we see one of the few differences within the PC, Dreamcast, and N64 versions here. The PC and Dreamcast have the same CGI cutscene as the PlayStation, and only the N64 has its own little real-time cutscene. Though fandom is a desolate and lawless wasteland, so take that info with a grain of salt. After the introduction, we get our first look at Gyro's lab, which is a kind of hub world. There are some notable design changes here. The portals to the game's 4 worlds are different and have a rainbow spiral thing going on in the PS. On 64, the outfit swapper actually talks to you to tell you about itself, while Gyro explains it to you on the PS. If you walk far enough towards the camera, you can see some of Gyro's other creations. On PS, it's a treaded robot thing, which is missing on the 64, instead having some kind of conveyor belt and broken radio. There's a large screen behind Gyro in both versions, but on the PS, you can use this to save or load the game. You can also talk to Gyro in both games, and he will tell you his plan involving setting up reflector dishes in each world to give his teleporter enough power to transport you to the next world. On 64, the hub of World 1, Duckie Mountain, has a double waterfall and is surrounded by a stream, while the PS has no stream, but a single waterfall, trees, and even a cobbled wall. The PS definitely wins in presentation here. You can also see the portals are designed differently. Your progress in each level is represented by 3 screens on the ground with pictures on them on 64. On PS, it has slightly more ambiguous lights on posts. You'll notice 1-1 looks pretty similar in both versions. The UI is a little different, and the tutorial robots are very different, but the general point of each tutorial is the same. Even though the PS tutorials are voiced, the 64 versions are not. Through them, we learn some of the basics that are true in each game, such as the 3 different types of stars, and 100 stars gives you a life. There are also some odd minor changes, such as this moose and skunk enemy swapping places. The PS tutorial refers to Donald's state after collecting a milkshake as Hyper Donald, though the 64 just calls it the Super Duper ability. In both games, it gives you temporary invulnerability and increased speed, as well as heals you if you're already in angry mode. We're also introduced to the concept of toy collecting. There are 2 parts to collecting toys. First, you must find Merlock's magic spellbook and smack or jump on it. This will release the toy from Merlock's spell and allow it to be collected. Otherwise, the toy is just transparent and you'll walk right through it, unable to pick it up. There's also a timer that counts down once you hit the book, and if you don't pick the toy up in time, you'll have to go back and start over by hitting the book again. I actually really like this. It adds a tiny bit more challenge, though most of the toys are incredibly easy to get throughout the entire game. Probably my favorite part of 1-1 is this little waterfall section in the PS version, but the 64 kind of ruins it by obscuring it with this covered bridge. Near the end of the level, but not quite in the same place, we find the last main collectible. On PS it is an orb, on 64 it is a wedge, but they both do the same thing. There's one in each level to find, and you must find all of them to unlock the boss portal. I do find it odd that the last structure is basically the same shape in both versions, even containing the same Merlock challenge, though it's made of brick on PS, which kind of clashes with the rustic log cabin feel of the rest of the level. And the orb is in a slightly different location than the wedge, perhaps to be unavoidable? The next stage is called Dangerous Cliff, but that needs a bit of explanation. I like to consider the bottom left level to be the first level in each world, call it 1-1. Then I would count the levels up going clockwise so that the top left would be 1-2, top right 1-3, and the last bottom right level would be 1-4. For some strange reason, 1-1 and 1-4 have been swapped in every world between versions, though technically if you go clockwise from 1-1 in one game and counterclockwise from 1-1 in another, they match up again, but I think we're overthinking it at this point. All you really need to know is that levels with the same name are the ones that I'll be comparing, as they're more or less variations of the same theme. Anyway, this level, Dangerous Cliffs, is our first side-scrolling level. As you can see, the layout is still quite similar, though there are some interesting interpretations of enemy designs. On 64, this plant obstacle actually looks alive and dangerous, while on PS, it looks like a dead shrub that I think I actually tried to walk through the first time I saw it because it just looks like a background object. Oh, and I finally can tell that this enemy is actually a hunter and not some sentient bush. Here I also noticed that sometimes enemies will fly off into the distance if you hit them, especially when you're in hyper mode. And of course, the time is set to evening on 64 for some reason. I like how on 64 some of the platforms are little pedaling feet. That's a nice touch. The track is the same level on both versions with one difference. On PS, the level is called Huey's Track. On 64, it's simply called The Track. You might remember I mentioned there were toys to collect on each level. Once you have all the toys, you bring them to the nephew in the hub world and he will unlock the bonus stage. On PS, this nephew is in fact Huey, but another odd minor change is that it's Louie on 64. This level is another side-scroller, and though both versions look very similar, there's a different feel to the gameplay that's hard to capture with footage. The platforming feels much smoother on 64. Everything just kind of flows together more nicely, almost as if the level was designed more with the movement and jump arc in mind. The PS movement just felt more stiff overall, though so far my biggest complaint has to be Donald's attack. It's no Zeta Flare. His attack has an extremely short reach and is somewhat inconsistent. Timing attacks is more difficult than it needs to be, meaning many times you'll get too close when trying to attack and end up taking damage, and this is true for both versions. This led me to mostly avoiding enemies or just jumping over them when possible. The last stage on 64, or second stage on PS, is the Gorge. By now you've probably noticed the theme of similar yet different going on here. There's not too much to say about this one, except that it might be a little too easy. Again, it's evening on the 64 version. A bit more exciting is our first bonus level, Bear's Path. Unlocked by collecting every toy in each level, here we see probably the biggest differences in level so far. The The 64 has this cute little intro cutscene, whereas PS just straight up drops you into the action, no time to think about things. These bonus stages all have Donald running towards the camera. On PS, there is a monkey that will throw bananas to slow down the bear. On 64, this row is filled by a bee's hive that will temporarily distract the bear. There are also porcupine enemies on the 64 missing from the PS. There are bear traps to avoid in both games, though they can hurt Donald, they're entirely ineffective against the actual bear. Most of the layout is the same, but there are certain sections that are changed slightly, or use different assets to create the same feel. The bear's farewell cutscene is a bit more drawn out on the 64, and also the end portal has this cozy little log cabin built around it, while the PS just has these ugly stone walls. These bonus stages aren't my favorite part of the game, but 64 definitely wins this round. Here we go, our favorite thing to talk about here on Boss Raid. There's an interesting change even before we enter this stage. On PS, the name of the boss level appears on screen, while there is no level name on 64. The fight is practically the same with a few small differences. Bernadette begins by flying up high and dropping several eggs, 3 on 64, 5 on PS. On 64, all 3 will hatch a chick. On PS, only 2 eggs will contain chicks. If the falling eggs hit Donald, he will take damage on either version. After taking out the chicks, Big Bird goes into a chase sequence where she hovers above Donald, trying to land on him. On PS, she'll follow and land when she is right on top of him. On 64, she seems to move more randomly to a specific drop location. If she lands on Donald, it's an instant death. She'll try to land on Donald 4 times before needing to rest, at which point you need to jump on her head. On PS, there's even a little red arrow to help you out. If you take too long, she'll fly up and start the round over. After jumping on her, she'll jump up and, again, spawn in chicks. This time, on PS, the 2 chicks have spiked helmets. On 64, the 3 chicks will now jump around instead of only running. Again, take them all out to enter the next chase sequence, in which she again tries to land 4 times on PS but 5 times on 64. The last chick phase spawns 4 helmet chicks on PS and still only 3 on 64, but this time they fly and remain in the air for a bit longer. Finally, she drops again, still only 4 times on PS but 6 times on 64, before taking one final hit. The cutscene after the flight makes it clear that in both versions, Donald has murdered Bernadette. On to World 2, Duckberg. Besides the city theme, the hubs have very little similarities here. Again, there's a difference in nephews as well. It's here on the stage First Avenue that the differences really start ramping up. Exclusive to the 64 is an electrified water obstacle, while the PS has a new enemy that you can bounce on after defeating to reach higher places, and a bulldog enemy. The PS also has a short section that transitions from forward moving to side moving, then back again. In fact, it does this twice in the level, but the 64 levels never transition throughout the entire game. They're always either one way or the other. There are also doors that you can blast open on the PS version by kicking some nearby dynamite, usually to help complete a Merlock challenge. If there had been any remote similarities in these levels before the side-scrolling transition, they are all but lost after, and when it transitions back, Donald is now among the rooftops, while he stays on the ground the entire time on 64. Urban High Rises is next, again a stages 2 and 4 swap. The 64 uses many pipes blowing smoke as obstacles. On PS, these are replaced with chimneys and are used much less frequently. To be fair, there are also spouting pipes on PS, but they have much less personality. Again, save for the theme, these are practically completely different levels. Probably the most noticeable thing about this level is the weird reaction Donald has on 64 when being idly transported by conveyor belts. It's almost as if it's painful to him. Once again, our third level shares a namesake with the currently present nephew on PS, while on 64, the nephew again gets the shaft. Dewey's Rooftops, or simply Rooftops, now 2 words on 64, is another side-scroller, and surprisingly, these stages are once again extremely similar. The layout is almost exactly the same, besides the obvious change of models and textures, but even those have been kept more consistent. The PS even introduces its own semi-anthropomorphic pipes here. I think being able to play basically the same level back-to-back on both systems made me further realize how much better Donald controls on 64. He is responsive, and you can fine-tune your jumps while in midair. This makes some of the trickier jumps, what few there are, more manageable, and it feels great. I also love the background here. There are little details sprinkled in all over the place, like this rooftop garden, or clothes hanging out to dry, and little ice cream or barbershop signs all over the place. The entire atmosphere in not just this level, but every level in this world is done really well. I really feel like I'm just a small part moving through this living, breathing city. Just like that, we're back to extreme version differences in the fourth level, the roofs. On 64, Donald is indeed atop the nighttime roofs of Duckberg, although on PS, well, I mean, there are rooftops, but the name is less fitting, I think. I really like both of these levels, though the 64 level is my favorite of any level so far. It's a tiny bit more challenging than previous levels, of course that's to be expected as the game progresses. But now, after having played through the mindlessly simple beginning levels, even having to put the smallest amount of thought into your actions makes this game feel infinitely more fun. The PS has, thus far, been overall more challenging, but some of that has to do with fighting the controls. I also like the pelican enemy on 64, as anyone who lives in the city will tell you, pelicans are quite a problem. The bonus level, Main Street, is crazy different. While the 64 starts you out with a little cutscene, and then starts the chase, just like the last bonus stage, the PS starts out like another regular level. You start walking down the path, chasing a chipmunk for some reason, and then it transitions to a sideways path for a short bit, then finally to the chase section, all connected together as one level. The chase section's level design bears practically no resemblance to its counterpart. On 64, the car is themed as a Beagle Boys car, whereas this association is dropped on PS. Also on PS, there are levers and levers that you can pull to temporarily slow down the car, and on 64, there are gates near each checkpoint where you can rest for a bit. The 64's chase scene is also much longer, so I think that might be why they added a bit of level to the beginning of the PS version. As the PS only will tell us, the boss stage is called Beagle Boy's Tower. A singular Beagle Boy operates a crane with a heavy steel demolition ball attached to it. He will attempt to drop the ball on Donald 3 times, though a bit less precisely on PS. After that, the crane will start to act up. He'll pop out and try to repair it, and it's at this time you need to literally kick his butt. If you fail to do so, he will jump back in for another round of attempted duck smashing. On PS, he takes damage from a kick here. On N64, he doesn't. However, in either game, after kicking him, he will start throwing out dynamite at Donald. On the 64 only, he'll also throw out a green-colored dynamite with a 9-second fuse. You need to kick this one back at him, and this is when he'll take damage on 64. On PS, you simply need to dodge all of his dynamite. On both versions, after Dynamite Round, he'll come back with his demolition ball. This time, it will actually do some demolishing, breaking away pieces of the stage. Again, after 3 smashes, you'll have a chance to attack. You simply repeat this process 2 more times to end the fight. However, on the 64 version, the 3rd kick will end the fight, cutting out what would be the final dynamite section. I find it strange that the PS version cut out the dynamite kickback feature completely, especially when that version had dynamite kicking in the regular levels, when the 64 didn't. In fact, having played all of World 2 on 64 beforehand, when I got to the PS version I thought to myself, oh, they must be introducing the concept here in levels so that when you get to the boss fight, you'll have a more intuitive idea of what you're supposed to do. Guess not. The hubs of Magica Dispel's Manor are pretty similar, but I think the PS wins on spookiness factor. Also, the 64 is too dark for my liking. First up is Haunted Hall, and this is another pair of levels that are eerily similar. In fact, probably the biggest difference is the design of these moving platforms. 64 has a skeletal hand, while PS has what looks like either a ghoulish butler serving up dead fish, or the USS Enterprise, depending on what angle you're looking at it from. Though Donald's weird platform riding reaction is more justified here. Both levels feature some 90-degree turns, but they never fully transition to side-scrolling. Even with the same layout, the PS platforming is a bit trickier, even after becoming mostly used to the inferior controls by now. Ghostly Path is another spookily similar level. The PS introduces these timed spiked coffin things that aren't on the 64. And while the 64 uses flying carpets as platforms, they're all replaced with flying broomsticks on the PS. The latter half of these stages diverge significantly, however. On the PS, there's a tricky section near the end that I really can only blame on genuine difficulty and not some game jank. Well, maybe I can blame game jank a little. Also, the difficulty spiked ridiculously out of nowhere. It was more challenging than I ever thought I'd see out of these games. On the N64, the platforming remained chill. I really liked level design, especially near the end in the outside section, which the PS doesn't have. Take everything I loved about the outside section and make an entire level out of it, and you have Creepy Corridor, though I can't say the same about Louie's Creepy Corridor. It's here that the N64 finally introduces those spiked coffins, and everything, again, just flows very nicely on this version. I like both levels a lot, and in fact, like the other levels in this world, these two have mostly the same layout, but the 64 just pulls it off better. It's hard to describe, but there's just a feel about the 64 version that I love. It's like being back on the rooftops of Duckberg, only during Halloween. Even the rain effect adds to the experience. Eerie Alley is also, for the most part, the same level, at least in the first half. The most notable difference is that the 64 has a cool spider section, which is sadly completely absent from the PS. The bonus level, cleverly titled Underhand Ed, as usual starts with a cutscene for the 64 and nothing for the PS. These levels start out almost as exact copies, with bits changed around here and there all throughout. On 64, there are electric gate things that can slow down the hand, while on PS, all you have are little floating mallets that turn into huge mallets that will slow the hand down by smacking at it when collected. The experience is essentially the same, though as usual the 64 is better presented, even with little ending cutscene not present on the PS. The boss fight is radically different in each version, so I'm going to talk about them separately. First, the 64 version. Madame Dispel will start by spawning a pumpkin enemy. You can't jump on it or kill it, you have to knock it off from the platform by repeatedly hitting it. After dispatching the pumpkin, she throws down lightning that does a wave of splash damage. When she tires of that, a bunch of coffins will float in the sky and start lighting up. You need to quickly make it to the one the light has stopped on, as soon all the others will grow spikes and be unsafe to stand on. Also, a skull bomb will appear above the safe coffin, which you need to smack towards Dispel. Do this 3 times to break through the bars and damage her. You'll move on to the next platform, where she'll spawn 2 pumpkins this time. Take them out again the same way, and more lightning, and then another coffin and bomb section. Repeat for a 3rd time, this time taking out 3 pumpkins to start the round, and that will be it for Dispel. The only thing that makes this fight difficult, and incredibly difficult at that, is the existence of these pumpkins. She'll spawn one at the beginning of the fight, and you have to push them off the platform with physical attacks. The problem is, as I've mentioned before, Donald has an incredibly short reach with his melee attack. The pumpkins also kind of charge a bit to make things even harder. I died many times to these stupid pumpkins. It is extremely frustrating to get through the 3rd platform, only to die from a pumpkin, then having to do everything all over again, especially because every other aspect of this fight is trivial and drawn out. The timing is so tight that I eventually just started killing myself if I took any damage on the first platform, because I was practically guaranteed to take another hit from one of these pumpkins before the 3rd platform. I ended up resorting to save states. I know, I'm a terrible person, but this level of frustration is unfair, and even with save states, I still got my ass handed to me. This fight I remember clearly as a kid, though I don't actually remember ever beating her. As for the PlayStation version, compared to the 64, this fight is a joke. The entire fight has changed, this time taking place from a camera angle fixed behind Magica that follows Donald. She starts by summoning minions, but thankfully not those friggin' pumpkins. She spawns into ghost farmers, I think, wielding pitchforks that look more like tridents. She'll throw out fire instead of lightning and will continue to barrage you until you take out all the minions. Once you do, she'll charge up a fireball and launch herself at Donald, creating a shockwave of fire. She does this twice, and after the 2nd attack is when you have a chance to jump on her. She'll then fly back to the middle of the arena and summon 3 minions to start the next phase. Finish them off, and this time jump on her after her 3rd charge attack. She will also give up a milkshake at this point to restore any HP. This alone would have made the 64 fight so much more bearable. She then starts the cycle over, this time with 4 minions and 4 charge attacks, and after one final jump, she's defeated. At last, we make it to Merlock's secret temple with roughly the same hub worlds, though I think the PS wins this time. Temple's entrance is our first level, and while both start off differently, they both start off with some extremely weird stuff going on, with eyeball projectiles and some kind of voodoo abomination. Both levels have lasers, fire-spitting statues, and lava traps to fit with the Indiana Jones or Hidden Temple kind of vibe. The difficulty has taken another ramp up here, especially on the PS. There are extremely precise jumps and more focus on timed platforming, and the hitbox for these mask guys is just flipping terrible. These stages are more different than the previous world, which tended to be mostly the same with a few change bits. This stage is mostly changed with a few similar bits. With Ancient Fate, we're back to having basically a duplicate set of levels. It plays well on both versions, if maybe a step back in difficulty from the previous level. The same can be said about Murky Way, or as the PS calls it, the Nephew's Murky Way, at least for the 64 version. They are again of similar layout, but perhaps with a few more changes than the previous level. While 64 was pretty smooth sailing, the PS had many BS parts that seem like they were now designing the stage around the control wonkiness. This time platform section, in particular, was needlessly difficult, and they knew. Just look where they put the checkpoint, right there at the start of the section. Oh, and by the way, on PS, after dying 3 times in a single stage, Donald will throw down his hat in anger upon respawning. The first few times it's kind of funny, but after 5 or 6 times in a row, it gets old. Like, hey, I just want to pick up and keep going where I left off, not wait around for you to only further express my own frustration. This section is a damn cakewalk on 64. Still, I do like both stages, I just have the usual complaints about the PS controls. Artifact Way is our final proper level, and probably has the greatest differences between versions so far. Though the beginning starts out similar, it quickly diverges, with mostly different level elements, save for a sprinkling of similarity here and there. Nothing too notable, though the PS has a tricky toy challenge, which is actually challenging and not just frustrating. Our final bonus, and penultimate stage of the game, is Head Alley, a name J.K. Rowling would probably not approve of. And look at this head on the PS1. Were they even trying? It looks more like a barrel, or a rock that somebody drew a face on. And just look at how it rolls. In what world do the laws of physics allow something to roll like that? Again, if we were to compare it to a barrel, it rolls like there's something jumping around inside of it. Anyway, the stages are, as you'd expect by now, similar yet different. The gameplay and challenge are about equal as well. Neither stage I would call bad, but it's hard getting past how bad that head looks. At least, both heads will knock Donald into the screen if he's hit by them. Finally, we enter Merlock's ceremonial room. Though Merlock gives the same speech to begin with in both versions, just like with Magica, each fight differs greatly, so again, I'll discuss them separately. And again, we'll start with the 64. They've used the bonus level run towards the camera theme for this one. We run from Merlock in his dragon form, dodging his attacks and hitting the electric switches to fill the gauge on the screen. If you miss any of the switches, you will have to wait and try again on the next lap. After hitting all 3 switches, a turret gun will conveniently spring up from the ground. Go to it and shoot away Merlock's fireballs until you're presented with the opportunity to fire at his amulet and then do so. The turret gun has 3 of its own hit points, represented by the yellow lights on the top. If you're hit 3 times while on the gun, you will die instantly even if Donald is already at full health. After hitting the amulet, we go to round 2. Fire will shoot from the ground around the stage, and Merlock uses a sweeping AoE attack as he chases you. Avoid the fire traps while jumping over Merlock's attack, and other than that, everything is the same. Hit switches and use the gun to shoot his amulet. In round 3, Merlock alternates between his AoE attack and a straight line of fire. Stage fire also disappears, making this round arguably easier than the first. Hit 3 more switches and shoot the amulet once more, and Merlock is defeated. Sadly, on PlayStation, Merlock is a pushover. But even more sadly, the fight just isn't very fun. It takes place on a platform split into 9 pieces. 3 pieces will fall away as 4 spears are launched from either side of the arena. The pieces return and Merlock will jump down and launch a sweeping fire attack, telegraphed a bit by a line that appears on the ground, and also the Star of David for some reason. After this, he will just kind of stand there waiting for you to attack him. This will start round 2, which is very much like round 1, except that 4 pieces of the stage will fall, and the spears will be launched in a staggered sequence. Merlock will jump down again, this time performing his fire attack in a triangular pattern, and again, he'll just stand there doing nothing until you punch him. In round 3, 5 pieces of the stage drop and the spears launch in a slightly delayed sequence, and Merlock again uses his triangle fire attack, but this time will use another immediately after, this time turning the pattern upside down. And yes, he will just stand there yet again doing nothing, letting you freely get in the last hit and ending the fight. After that, the final cutscene plays, which on PS is the pre-rendered high-quality CGI, and on 64 is the real-time models, which I assume, like the intro, is exclusive to this version. Both are actually pretty good. The credits are obviously different, and I noticed the N64 had a lot of Arabic-sounding names, while the PS had Chinese names. Both credits also end with a dedication to Carl Barks, who created Duckberg, many of its inhabitants, and was extremely involved and influential in contributions to the character of Donald Duck. And that's pretty much it for these versions. Now there are a ton of small differences that I didn't get into, like the slight UI changes, saving and loading screens, idle animations, etc., but I think I got most of the important stuff. I should also mention that I skipped the time trials, which unlocks the various costumes. I already had to play each level essentially twice, sometimes more because my recording software was really fighting me on this one, and I just don't have the patience to play them any more than I already have. So I apologize, but honestly we're not missing much there. But I am left to wonder how these differences came about. Was one game made first, and then another team recreated it as best they could? Or were both teams given storyboards and level designs or concept art? And how much influence did the design of the other version, which I have to assume came first, have on these games? Well, let's go ahead and check that version out. This is the other home console version that was released on PS2 and GameCube. They are virtually identical, but I'm showing the GameCube version here, and right away it should be obvious why I didn't compare this side by side with the other two. Despite having the same name, this is a completely different game. There are gears now instead of stars, a special move mechanic, a timer, and a high score system, an end screen that gives bonus lives based on said score, and so many other differences. The hub worlds are different and honestly have less personality, and some of the levels have been removed. And the ones that remain are similar in name only. In each level, there are alternate paths all over the place, usually adding a bit of challenge for rewards. Playing through, you can see what some of the ports were trying to go for, especially with enemy design. And thankfully, Donald has an overpronounced attack, thus a much greater reach. Though still on the easier side, I think the platforming is better balanced, and even smoother than on the 64. Donald is in the air a lot more, from bouncing off enemies, which the special moves feature makes use of. Also, two of the buttons are used exclusively to just make Donald say one of a few random lines. There are no bonus levels, however, Head Alley is still around, serving as the final level in Merlock's temple. But perhaps now it should be called Hand Alley. Handily? Maybe JK would approve. And now that I fought Merlock in this version, I can see what they were going for on the PS. They were obviously trying to keep the same feel of this version, but failed miserably. I'm glad the N64 team didn't even try, and instead of a half-assed recreation, came up with something original. But this version is great. This is what a boss fight should actually be. Fun. And now here is the Game Boy Color version. Obviously, these are going to be quite different from the other versions we've seen so far. I feel the story is a bit more sinister, though essentially the same. I love the graphics, especially Donald. The goal is simply to find the end of each stage. There is no stage select, and as soon as you finish, you are instantly teleported to the next stage by gyro. You can jump on some enemies, and there are lots of things to collect. The 2-hit health system and anger mechanic is here, though here there are standalone health pickups as well as hyper mode pickups that are sometimes required to break open the path forward. It can be a little confusing where to go in spots, but it's nothing that you can't figure out soon enough, and the difficulty is basically perfect. There are many little hidden areas and rewarding side challenges. The 4 worlds are the same: Ducky Mountain, Duckberg, Dispel's Manor, and Merlock's Temple, and there are bosses at the end of each world. Jumping feels a bit floaty, though you do get used to it quickly. And as in every other Quackers game, Donald double jumps here as well, though there is no attack button. My biggest issue is the hitboxes, and it's not really every hitbox, just some. In fact, a lot of the time the platform hitboxes work in your favor, but I had a lot of trouble in many places just because of bad hitboxes. The camera's a bit snappy, but that was a problem a lot of platformers on the system had, and at least you have some control over the camera. The music is okay as well. I haven't really mentioned music in the previous games so far because overall it hasn't been anything exceptional, and here is no different. But it's not bad in any game. Good level design here as well, an all-around great little game. And lastly, we have Donald Duck Advance for the GBA. This game actually starts out with a very short clip of the CGI intro video we saw in the PS version. Then a higher quality version of the Game Boy intro follows, only this time there's another line of text inserted telling us we need to collect 3 spheres in each level to progress. This version uses a password system like the Game Boy version did, but you can also select which level you want to play if you've unlocked it. Once again, we have a completely different game, though with some echoes of the other games. We're back to collecting stars, and of course, what would these games be without the 2-hit anger system? From what I can tell, milkshakes now only heal and there is no hyper mode. There is, however, a run feature, and unlike the Game Boy, Donald can attack. The Merlock's Toy Challenge has been repurposed to collect those spheres I mentioned. I'm not as big a fan of the graphics here, although Donald's sprite still looks excellent. There are some similarities to the Game Boy game, such as some obstacle concepts and similar looking backdrops. Both games also have auto-scrolling chase sequences, and the 4 worlds are also all here, though there are no bosses, except the final boss. Though still more challenging than the console version, it's much less difficult than the Game Boy version. This one also uses the PS1 soundtrack, which is my least favorite. I find it a bit over the top and kind of unfitting for the game. Despite a few minor flaws though, this too is a good game, a nice mix of challenge and good game design. And that is Donald Duck Goin Quackers. I would say thoroughly compared and contrasted through all the versions. After playing through all of them, I would recommend every single one. They're all great games. I think my favorite is still the one I played first as a kid, the Nintendo 64 version. But I also really enjoyed the PlayStation 1 version. Don't get me wrong, the GameCube version is great too, but lacks a bit of the charm from the other two, in my opinion. But really, you can't go wrong with any of them, including the handheld games. That's it for this episode. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time on Boss Raid.